Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice. This is my amazing co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about being happy at work. Yes, some of us are, some of us aren't, some of us are some of the times. But I'd be curious, Donovan, where are you at with this idea of being happy at work? How do you feel about this?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is basically defining happiness, right? I actually think that's the most important point to start with. And, if you think about happiness at work as sort of the emotional or like pleasurable type of experience, like, oh, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to have elevated mood all the time and feel really good and be super happy. That's a trickier one. To me, I think about tapping into another component of happiness, which is sort of the purpose, right? Purposeful stuff. And you may have to do things that are unpleasant or not pleasurable to produce sort of this sense of meaning. And there's other things that fall into this bucket, right? Like raising kids. It's probably one of those. If you message people while they have kids, generally their report of happiness is lower than people who don't have kids, but people choose to do this kind of stuff all the time. So it feeds into this other piece, which is purpose or meaning. To me, that still falls under the umbrella of happiness. It may not for other people, but I think this definition is super important because it's sort of the baseline of where to start for me anyway, is if you want to be happy at work, you have to sort of fit your work into this purpose architecture. And you might be able to, and we'll probably talk about this too, you might be able to get some of this like pleasurable, enjoyable moments out of it, and have that kind of elevated mood as well. But to consistently have that in something that's work, I don't think is very common. All right, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'd concur with that idea that to have the expectation that you're 100% happy or even 90% happy all the time and fulfilled and joyous, I don't know if that's realistic. Even though I feel fortunate in that, with my work as a naturopathic doctor, it is very fulfilling work when I'm actually working with patients and helping them heal. That's very satisfying, but that's just actually a very small percentage of my job when of being an entrepreneur and a business owner. And there's all this like back end stuff and all these admin things and things I just dread doing or just kind of like don't get excited about, whether it's like bookkeeping or marketing, having to deal with social media all the time, like all this promotional work and all these things that don't get me as excited, and learning to navigate like those things that are not the most satisfying, fulfilling parts of my job, but it is a necessary part of my job for my business to keep running. So I have to continue that to get the, like, I guess the little carrot that I want of being working with patients. But I think like taking a step back though, how I kind of am able to endure those less fun, more tedious things to do as part of the business is just to kind of step back and look at my purpose, like you were just mentioning, like what is my purpose, even though this isn't necessarily fun stuff for me to do, stepping back, zooming out and thinking about like, okay, why is this important for me to do? This does increase my impact. I'll have more patients. I'll make more differences for people's in their lives. And yeah, I can find a way to make it not as dreadful if I'm creative and find, or if it's really something I don't want to do, I just outsource and hire someone to do those things that I don't want to do. And so that's some of the ways that has me have work be more enjoyable, and so I can be more happy and work with more people.
Yeah, so I think you touched on quite a few really important pieces or points. One of the things that I want to start with is sort of this idea that jobs are a combination of things that are fulfilling and things that maybe are not as fulfilling. And I think this holds true even for a lot of the jobs that people think of as dream jobs, or these sorts of like really um whether or not they're prestigious, they're kind of like idealized, right? Like, but if you think about jobs like, okay, what would it be like to be an artist all the time? And it's like, yeah, you may be able to spend a bunch of time doing the really joyful stuff of like crafting paintings or whatever else. You also probably have to deal with this stuff, like you were saying, like managing your books, selling places, negotiating with people, like other things that don't fall in that bucket.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, may get really lucky, and maybe if you're at the top of that field, you can just focus exclusively on painting things and putting them together. But for the most part, there's going to be some combination of things that are enjoyable and some that are not.
Right.
And that's why I think it's so important to really get synchronized on that purpose piece,
Mm-hmm.
because once you have a job that you actually care about the work that's getting done, then you can kind of play in the margins around like, well, I don't really like doing the books. I'll pay someone to do that. Oh, I do. You can kind of give and take on that. But I don't know if you've had this experience. If you have a job where you don't feel like the work is meaningful, or there's not a sense of purpose there, you can still play with some of those other factors, but you missed out on the core piece, right? It's still going to be generally unfulfilling, and it's going to be really hard to find joy in any of it. And I will give an example from when I had a job where I was doing sales, and I was selling something, or was told to sell something as like part customer service, part sales. And I was told to sell things to people that I thought would genuinely harm them. The products themselves were not harmful,
Yeah.
but they were not necessarily a good fit for the people that I was told to sell them to. And that job was terrible. Now, the day to day, the sort of interactions with people and all that stuff was completely fine.
Yeah.
But because that purpose piece was so misaligned, that job, like I would leave every day feeling gross, feeling like I had not used my time wisely,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like potentially I had caused other people harm. And while it was something that helped me gain some skills, and that's the only way that I was able to do it for the very short period of time I did. I think I was in that job for 3 months, somewhere between 3 and 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only way that I could get through it, is finding some other piece of purpose to attach it into. But anyway, to go back to the higher point, I think most jobs are going to be some combination of, oh, wow, this is stuff that's enjoyable and makes me happy in the emotional sense and the high end positivity sense, and a bunch of tasks that are more along the lines of, someone has to do this. This has to get done because it's work. And I think there's a fundamental tension between work and happiness of the emotional kind, because work is effortful, and in general, high effort activities are not that pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the case, but for the most part, exerting effort is something that we don't naturally necessarily want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What you said about, having a sales job that was not fulfilling for your purpose, and almost like kind of going against your moral or integrity in a way. I can see that would be eating you up inside. And I think some people, like, I had that impression about sales for a while, of just like, I don't like selling. Even though I'm a business owner, I realize I have to figure out how to sell as a business owner. It's part of business. But realizing that, as long as whatever it is that I'm selling, like, I believe the product or the service that would actually make a difference and enhance that person's life, then it doesn't feel like icky to me. And they can say yes or no. They can choose yes or no. And I've discovered that, like, although, just going from my own personal experience with, like, I've had so many jobs and odd jobs throughout my life, including in sales, and I've done massage therapy. I was just making this comparison the other day of, like, how sales feels. And you had touched on, like, the emotional state of of happiness and tuning into that, which I think is also really important. But kind of going back to my point of how I was describing to my partner of like both business and sales, they kind of go hand in hand to some degree. It feels like an emotional roller coaster because my income is not very like consistent week by. It's like I can put in X amount of hours, it doesn't mean X amount of dollars. But it's like I had these incredible months in July and August for my business, and then the next 2 months were like terrible, just like up and down, and then it's this roller coaster, which is almost tiring and frustrating sometimes to be on it. And I was telling him about how like other jobs I've worked as a massage therapist before in many different spas and hotel settings, and I remember it's very stable and not a very exciting job, but it was a stress-free job because it's like you go in, you do your job, and you leave, and you're done with work. And that was nice. And it wasn't really stressful work. You're helping other people relax and de-stress. And I don't have to like think that hard. I just do what I know to do, but it's just kind of like repetitive and yeah, not very exciting, but in a way that was kind of like a nice balance to and it I don't it's kind of hard to say because I would say I was happy with those types of jobs, but it didn't produce the highs of like sales and business ownership. So it's like a steady state of emotion versus like this up and down. And I'm debating with myself on whether or not I like one more than the other. And I don't even know if I have an answer. I kind of like both. And sometimes I like to have both types of jobs so I can have the stability of one versus the roller coaster of the other in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think basically there are different, how will I put this, sort of reward patterns
Yeah.
in different jobs, and they may or may not lend themselves to people's sort of natural baseline. It sounds like you're somewhere in the middle where you're like, oh, I kind of like this sometimes, and I kind of like this other times.
Yeah.
I know there are other people who value stability as like their highest value, and so
Yeah.
that the experience that you had of sort of that like roller coaster, some good months, some bad months would break them, right? Like emotionally just
Yeah, it's
ruin
just like,
them.
yeah.
And then I've had other or no other people who sort of do not digest sort of this kind of flat baseline, sort of like, oh, well, it's not, you don't have any big wins, but you don't really have any, terrible days or bad losses or whatever else. And that's for some people like really hard for them to, they want, something with a little bit more of a rush or whatever, like closing a sale after getting declined a bunch of times. So I think it just goes to sort of what is the pattern of work that sort of fits for people. Because I know for me, I don't as much like sort of that external reward system, right? Of like, oh, I got to sell from someone. I'm much more in tune with or aligned with I like doing big projects type of thing, right? Like I like putting together something for a long time, blah 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 blah. Boom, it's done. Here you go. Like I can deliver something. And there are probably more types of work that we have not covered, or more styles of like reward patterns or whatever else. But I think that's the core of what we can take out of that and use is sort of figuring out what pattern actually fits you and makes you feel okay. Because I know like there are some people that I know that if I gave them the type of work that I like to do, like here's a big project, they would hate it so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do that. Like my partner has one of those types of jobs where there's just like projects and it's stable and it's steady and he gets a steady paycheck. But at the same time, I get a sense from him that he doesn't always enjoy his work all the time. Don't tell his boss that, but I don't know. I think they would probably suspect that's how a lot of their employees feel in these types of jobs. But one of the things I've heard is to just like reflect on not just your purpose in that role, in that job, but like what's the company's purpose? And maybe
Mm.
that gives you a little more satisfaction of knowing like what is this project that's contributing to a bigger project, which is contributing to the goal and the purpose of the company. Like what are they trying to accomplish, and how are you like a contributor to that process by doing your part in that? And I think um I've told him to focus on that, and he says that helps to some degree, is to just think of like, oh, how is this making a difference in people's lives, versus like, how do you feel about this boring task that you have to do? Kind of a thing. I think that gives you a better sense of fulfillment and purpose, and hopefully not feel so like bleh about work all the time, and more excited. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the pathways that I've seen success with is going from, oh wow, I have to, go through all of the things that I've sold and bought in the last year to do accounting for my stuff. Wow, that sounds fun. Like changing from sort of that attitude
Yeah.
of being task focused to going like, okay, so as a result of all the stuff that I've done this year to like account for it and to make sure that my projects are running smoothly or whatever, I need to go in and tune these things up. And it seems like a really small adjustment, but yeah, focusing more on sort of the higher level mission or outcome, or how that task, because the task has to have some sort of value. And if it
Right.
doesn't, then maybe you should try to see why you're doing it.
Right.
But for the most part, you're not doing tasks with no meaning,
Mhm.
and there's a reason they have to be done. So following that reason a couple layers can be really helpful for tuning into purpose.
Mhm.
Another thing, sort of a parallel path that I've found a lot of mileage out of, is instead of looking at particular tasks as tasks that just have to get done, looking at them as particular skills or ways to build skills. Like I was saying with that sales job, the only way that I was able to get through it was not looking at like, oh, here's the company's mission to make $1 billion, okay, and sell stuff that I don't really want to sell, but turning it into more of like okay, so the reason I'm here is to learn how to do sales better, to learn how to sort of talk to people and find out their needs, and how to, I don't remember what else I learned at that job, but sort of build up this skill set. That for me has worked a lot for jobs that I don't necessarily want to be in forever, or that have a lot of aspects that I don't like. Focusing on what skills am I getting out of this, and then spending the actual day-to-day thinking about that, thinking like, okay, today how am I going to learn how to be better at sales, instead of, hey, today how am I going to help facilitate selling something that I don't think is very good for people.
Yeah. Oh, I could relate to that a lot in sales, because it's it's part of the job to get a lot of rejection and no's, and that can be a little disheartening when you get a string of no's. But like my one of my motivations is to get better at sales, and to develop that skill set. So I can resonate with that a lot, because if you get a lot of no's, it's disheartening. And if you don't get better at that, like, if you only sell like one out to every 20 people, it's like maybe your next goal is like, okay, let's try to shoot for 1 out of 10 people. Um, if that if you can achieve that. So it's like, what can I do? How can I be more efficient in my sales, like, and kind of evaluate my own performance, or if there's someone evaluating your performance, or a coach that you're working with to evaluate your performance. Yeah, it is value. Sales is a valuable skill, and if you can be good at sales, and you will never go hungry, is what I hear. Because it's like, yeah, there's so many things to sell in the world, and of course naturally you could probably eventually find something that you can align with, for something meaningful and purposeful, for that can benefit people in people's lives. But you have to be willing to go through that, the rejection. And I think that kind of reminds me of another point I wanted to make, of like, it is important to some degree to have wins. I think in whatever type of, whether it's like completing a project or getting a sale, whatever that might be, of just being able to have, and you have to kind of decide for yourself, like, how frequently do I need a win at work for me to not like hate myself in my job kind of a thing. Like, what's that threshold? And let's try to get above that threshold. And what would be that threshold to even thrive and really love my job versus just like my job and be happy at work? Because if it was just like, if I was just making one sale a year, that would feel pretty terrible. Not very like exciting and kind of get me in a rut and not really thrilled to keep going at that type of job. But if it was like once a week, then I'd be like, oh yeah, that seems exciting. Or like one a day, I'd be like, yeah, I love my job. If I got a sale every day, that would be like, yeah, this is awesome. If you're getting more frequent wins. So it's like determining, okay, how many wins do I really need, or projects to complete, or pats on the back from my manager, whatever that might be, to feel like happy and satisfied. And I know that's kind of like external, but it can be like you can control some of that internally if it's like getting better at sales or getting more efficient with your project management or whatever that might be. Yeah. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think a lot of jobs have those sorts of metrics built in, right? There's a lot of jobs where it's very clear to see how you're doing and where you can adjust or get coaching or whatever else to keep improving those skills.
Mhm.
On the flip side, there are also a lot of jobs that don't have anything like that. And introducing something like that for yourself can make a big difference in how you feel about work and sort of a sense of like progress or accomplishment, which for a lot of people is something that is really valuable when it comes to work.
Yeah.
So if you don't already have that sort of stuff built in, finding something that you can sort of anchor on can be very useful. And that doesn't have to be, a metric necessarily that's directly tied to some sort of output or anything. It's as long as it's something that you find meaningful, even if you're doing something like cleaning and you figure out like, oh, okay, here's the how long it takes me to do this generally. And I'm going to try this and see if it's any faster, right? Just little tiny tweaks and adjustments like that and ways to benchmark things can be useful for making it just gives you a sense of how you're progressing in the direction you're going.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think knowing that you've made progress increases that sense of fulfillment. Although going to your cleaning example, I was just thinking if I were just a cleaner, I feel like it always feels good to enter a clean house. So it's just like knowing that you're gonna make whoever you're cleaning for feel good the next time they enter their environment, whether it's their work or office or their home, whatever that might be. It's just like getting the benefit of helping someone feel good, I think is another way. And I guess I feel like that with massage. It's like, oh yeah, it feels good because you help someone feel good in some degree. And there's lots of jobs. And I even think of like, even if you were a trash collector, to some degree. I don't know. I don't know what they think or how they manage to stay happy with their job, but that is a valuable service that, I appreciate the trash collector coming by every week to pick up the trash because there's going to be more trash in it. Otherwise, my house would be like really gross if it wasn't, and I wouldn't be happy. So he's or she is doing their part in helping us with our environment feel better and happier. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if this is what a trash collector thinks about, but I would say that may help someone who's in that line of work feel better if they're not really happy with their job, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that piece of just connecting your job to what the purpose actually is.
Yeah.
If I was a cleaner, which I would be horrible at, that's like probably the worst job for me, but like I would definitely do before and after pictures. Like there's nothing more gratifying to me when something is really gross and dirty and then seeing it clean. I'm generally not the person who helps with that transition just because I don't know why. I don't know why I don't have that skill. We'll not go off on a tangent on that, but it goes back to what we were saying before, which is just kind of like tying your work into something meaningful, right? Like trash collection, like you were saying, is a job that people could maybe generally easily go like, oh well, like that doesn't seem like a very good job. But the purpose behind, like, I can't imagine how much garbage would be piled up everywhere
Of
if
course.
no one was hauling. It would be horrible. Like, it would be a horrible hellscape of trash all over the place.
Yeah.
So stuff, just finding those connections, I think. And I get this is sort of related, but not really. But I want to talk about it anyway. Finding ways to just thank people for certain jobs that may not get a lot of praise because you recognize how big of a difference it makes.
Yeah.
I think can go a long way in just sort of bolstering someone's day or helping them feel happy at work, which I know is not exactly what we're talking about, but it's related enough. I can't tell you how many times I have been in a job that's sort of, like
Mhm.
behind closed doors or in the back or not front and center, and gotten praise and just felt amazing, or seen it happen or been part of it and just see people light up. So uh side note PSA, if you see people doing good work on anything, really just giving them some appreciation can really go a long way in brightening their day.
Yeah, no, I concur with that because yeah, especially for anyone that's in a leadership type of position and they have someone actually working beneath them. I think especially if you know that job for them isn't like they're thrilled bouncing off the walls about doing, then I think it's even more important to like acknowledge them relatively frequently. I don't know what we recognize, but like enough instead of just like calling them into your office just for when they're not doing things right or where they need to be corrected for whatever they're doing, like actually consistently acknowledge them. And I think that helps people feel more satisfied when they're recognized and valued for the work that they're doing. It makes a difference for them in the long term. So that's a shout out to anyone in a leadership type of position to acknowledge the people underneath you. And if you're in not in a leadership position and you're feeling not valued, if it's possible, maybe consider, you know, the next time you're meeting with your boss, if it's feasible. And, I know you can't necessarily control the personality of your boss, and some might be receptive, some might not. But just like express, if you feel safe to express, hey, I feel like I'm doing this. I'm doing all these things. I'm committed to the purpose of this company, and I don't feel like I'm being recognized or valued. And that would really make a difference for me. Um, in this company. Just like not in like an attack way, you gotta recognize, but just like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And it would make a difference. And, and yeah, happy employees means happy business typically.
Yeah, so I wish I could remember the book that I read, but there's basically a book that's all about how recognition is like one of the strongest tools you have to drive culture positively in work environments. And I guess we're talking about how to be happy at work. So if you can do something to sort of foster or bolster that sort of environment, and maybe that means just showing recognition and appreciation to others and hope that it catches on,
Mhm.
um that is above and beyond like I can't remember the other factors of the name of the book. It's driving me crazy, but it is one of the most impactful indicators for how satisfied people will be with their jobs if they feel like they've been appreciated and acknowledged. So you may not always be able to elicit that from others, right? You can ask for it, like you said. You can sort of set something up and ask for it. But the one thing you can absolutely control is showing that to the people around you at your job. And examples and sort of situations like that tend to leak out a little bit and increase it. So that's for sure something that I think is valuable and worth doing, is just showing more appreciation and acknowledgement to your coworkers and maybe your boss or whoever else, um, because that drives like that above and beyond everything else, drives a positive workplace.
Mhm. I would be curious, and I have a question for you on your thoughts of, what if someone was um an employee and their boss was not very, they have that personality that's just kind of like, you feel like you can't really lose your job, but it's maybe even considered a toxic work environment type of situation. Like how to navigate and be happy when you don't have control over your asshole boss, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if you're stuck in that situation,
Yeah.
there's not a clear happy path of like, I'll just do this and everything will work out, right?
Right.
You're in a position where you have to weigh certain trade-offs.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the best or the first option is, like you mentioned, sort of talking to them about like ways to be recognized or whatever else. In the example, you said the boss is an asshole already, so we're gonna pretend that that didn't work.
Yeah.
So, and this is what gets people to quit. So I think or like, again, one of the main drivers of turnover is not feeling recognized or appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the options is, if you can't lose that job, just start looking for other things and try to make the most of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another potential option, depending on the job or the what the situation is you can really only interact with your boss when you have to or need to, right? You just really limit
Mm-hmm.
sort of those interactions and make the most of what's going on if you don't want to change out of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but other than that, so basically the solutions come out as what is 100% for sure in your control, and that's whether or not you stay there, or sort of the interactions you have to a degree. That's the only place that you can for sure make a change.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the first step is to sort of make it known, because more times than people think, individuals are acting in a certain way that they may not know the impact that they're having on others. I personally have had experiences with people in leadership positions getting that sorts of feedback, not from me necessarily, but just getting that feedback in general, and sort of recognizing like, oh, I need to be better at this. I need to work on this more. Um, so if they are truly just not a good person and very toxic, which I guess is kind of how you set up the scenario, then you have to weigh off. You have to weigh out, okay, how much do I enjoy being at this job? How much is the pay or whatever worth to me? What are my other options? But most of the time, there's going to be some wiggle room in being able to sort of get some feedback to them, and any halfway reasonable uh, manager or person in a leadership position will actually try to accommodate in some way. Whether or not that actually makes you feel appreciated and whether you want to stay is a whole other story. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no easy answer, no clear path. It's just some stuff that you can try, and unfortunately, you have to weigh out the different factors and see what it is that is the best fit based on what's available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I concur in that. You should, I would say, expand your mind and realize that you're not necessarily locked into that job, even though maybe it feels like you are. And the job market can be hard, and maybe you have to put out like several applications all the time, and lucky to get one interview. I get that it's hard, but if you're open, determine like what do you really need to live within your means. For one, it's like maybe it means taking a pay cut to do a job that's not as stressful. But you could still survive within that. Maybe it's being an Uber driver. That's like a lot stressful, and you don't have to interact with like any higher up authority type of figure. Or and if it pays the bills sufficiently, then that's your choice to like stay in that stressful toxic job, or you know try other things that might not be like completely super satisfying, but at least it's getting you out of that toxic environment. The other thing I would say is like learning to regulate your emotions, and we've touched on this a lot in other episodes, of just like noticing like that stress response you get when your boss says something, and seeing if you can like just kind of calm and center yourself and realize that whatever they're saying, if they're being critical or nasty or mean, just be like, that has really nothing, they're probably projecting whatever it is that they're dealing with in their life. It has nothing to do with me. It sucks that I'm the punching bag, or if that's the case, but I'm doing what I can. I did nothing wrong. I'm like, yeah, just be like, to not let that person, whoever it is, whether it's a boss or a family member or someone else, to not let them kind of impact you emotionally, and like learn to, whether that's working with a professional or someone else, to be able to be with them however they are, and just realize, okay, my goal, my focus is doing this project and getting this done. And regardless of whatever they say, I'm not gonna let them get the best of me. I'm gonna persevere through it all. Yeah, they don't get to decide how I feel about myself and my worth.
Yeah, if you're in a situation like that and you have mindfully and consciously chosen to remain in it, that is one of your best options, is to sort of steel yourself emotionally to be able to bear some of this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
On a related note, I actually think it's fairly important, and it might seem tangential, but I don't think it is at all, is really one of the things that can help make you happier at work is knowing exactly what it is that you spend your money on. Like you were saying, like, oh, how much do you really need? Because I feel like the default path for most people is to make more and try to continue making more and also spend more exactly proportionate to how much more they make.
Right.
So, one of the things that can be extremely useful is doing sort of an audit around the type of lifestyle that you're comfortable with. And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean your idealized, I have 3 pools in my house lifestyle,
Right.
but what it is that you actually genuinely are pretty content with in the day to day and how much that costs.
Mhm.
Because I see people staying in jobs that they absolutely hate because of the money
Mhm.
with no real reason or no real goal as to where that money is going to go,
Mhm.
right? They just want more money for the sake of having more money. And so they stay at this job that they hate.
Right.
And there are certain things like, like let's say you have a 5 bedroom house or something.
Mhm.
And so to pay your mortgage or whatever else, then you continue at this job that you hate that happens to pay a lot. But do you need 5 bedrooms? Like, does that add to your life? Because there's a lot of people who are in this situation that I've been to their place
Mhm.
and their house is bigger than they need. And this is just one example,
Yeah.
but it's bigger than they need. And
Mhm.
they don't use 2 or 3 of the rooms ever,
Ever. Yeah.
ever. Right? There's just stuff in there collecting dust
Mhm.
and hanging out. And they're working a ton more at something that makes them unhappy.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess what it really gets down to is, at the end of your life, after you've done everything, like, are you going to look back and be like, oh, good thing I had bedroom 4 and 5, and for the one time a year I had guests, that and instead of like, wow, I'm glad I found, a place of work that I've had actual purpose driven, sort of interactions. Anyway, I just think it's really important, if you want to be happy at work, freeing yourself from the shackle of I need to make as much money as possible, because certain situations, certain people know exactly what they spend their money on and how much they need, and like, okay, well, I need to make a little more, or I could stand to make a little less. But in general, I don't think most people have any idea, and they just say, my paycheck is $2,000, so I'll spend $2,000 and call it good from there.
Right. Yeah. I think you touched on some really good points there, in like being more mindful about how you're spending your money, and do you really need like these things, if you're miserable at your job. I really liked, because I was about to say this, but you beat me to the punch of of like actually looking at, like, if it were the end of your life and you're looking back and reflecting, it's like, do you really want to be someone who says, like, wow, I'm really glad I stayed at that job I hated for 40 years just to make money and not really even enjoy my life? Or, do you want to like look back and be like, hey, I had to scrimp and scrape and do some odd jobs and things, but I got to have these really amazing moments in my life and enjoy my life and not be miserable, things like that. So I think that makes a difference of being like, okay, zoom into the future and you're looking back instead of, I think this is the point that I wanted to like extract and elaborate a little more on, is this idea of like, if or when I make like X amount of money, then I'll be happy. This like, if this happens, then I'm doing this to be happy later. I'm working at this miserable job so I can be happy later. And I'm like, I don't know if it's like, are you really going to be happy later when you make like X amount of money when you get to that goal? Or would it be more in your interest and benefit to figure out how can you be happy now with like whatever amount of money it is that you need, or not necessarily using money as the determinant of your happiness? So, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to look at, oh, once I hit a certain number, I'm going to be happy.
Right.
Not having any money can make you unhappy very fast in a lot of different ways.
Yes.
But it's at a certain point. So basically, the way that I look at it is like, you use money to buy, or most people use money to buy the necessities first, right? So if you don't have a place to live, then getting a place to live is pretty important and pretty useful. But once you reach a certain point that the sort of no-brainer, very clear paths are already paid for or well under control, right? Okay, I have a place to sleep. I can buy food, that sort of stuff. Then additional money can make you happier, but only if you are spending it on things that produce happiness, which are far less intuitive once you get to a certain point. And if it comes at a trade-off of being at a job that you hate, then the trade-off is probably not good. So what I mean by that is like, okay, let's say you spend 40 hours a week at a job you hate to make an extra $5,000, whatever. If you're not spending that $5,000 to produce at least 40 hours of you feeling happier, then it's not a good trade-off. And chances are you're probably not. If you're already covering, if it's a given that you're covering some of these things that produce unhappiness, like not having housing or not having food or whatever else.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, there's a bunch of studies that show the number kind of bobbles around a bit, but at a certain point, like 75-ish K, making more money than that does not necessarily increase happiness at all, because at that point, that's when you for sure have enough money to like, okay, I have a place to live, I have food to eat, I can take care of all my needs. But then whether or not you spend the rest of that money and the cost that you have to incur to actually earn it, that's when those trade-offs start coming into play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Agreed. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just had one last point, which is going back to sort of like making this money at a job that you don't really like. If you have a purpose for the money, that can be one of the ways to tie purpose back into a job that you don't like, right? So if you want to record an album or something and you're doing this finance job that you don't really like, but you're very, very clear on, hey, I'm doing this to earn the money to do this other thing, that can be another way to drive purpose. And if you know exactly what it is you need or want to use the money for, it can also make it a lot easier to digest some of the less pleasant aspects of the job. Doesn't always work, but it's just one last point I wanted to raise.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point of, saving up money for something that would bring you happiness is always a benefit as well. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.